Hi guys, Ian from Football Boots, and today we're going to look at the change in the upper of the Nike Magista Opus. So with the brand new launch of the Motion Blare pack, we're going to talk about the change of upper, and it's not the first time we've seen a change of upper. Some of you may remember the Radiant Reveal pack, the Hypervenom 2s. They changed the upper on those. So it started off, the Radiant Reveals were exactly the same as these. With the 2s, they had this much kind of thicker, less flexible upper that changed from the original Hypervenoms, but it made sense because it happened when the generation changed. But what happened when the Spark Brilliance came along is that they went back to the upper that we'd seen before, that softer, better upper. A lot of players preferred it. You would have seen the likes of Ross Barkley. He wore the Radiant Reveal ones before we switched to this changed upper. So it's gone back to what you kind of seen, what players really liked about the original Hypervenoms. And this is what I've got here is the finish. It's got the new upper again. These were the Wayne Rooney 250s, but the upper stayed the same from the Spark Brilliance. Those are the finishes that Matt has, the ones that he really likes, and the upper is so much grippier and so much better. So Nike will change things mid kind of generation if they need to. Has happened on some other things as well. You may have seen our video on the Tiempos. Now there were problems with the Tiempos, a lot of sole separation with the original Legend 6s. They tried to solve it a little bit later on, so actually kind of around the time of the Spark Brilliance stuff, they changed the way that the toe box was positioned on the front of them, trying to stop the sole separation problems with the Legend 6. They didn't completely eradicate it. I know a lot of people still had a lot of trouble with the Tiempo Legends, but they did manage to make a change again, but it was subtle. They didn't tell anybody about it. It's the same as what's happened with these Opus. They haven't jumped out and said, hey, we've changed something. Now, other brands do this as well. What I've got here is a player pair of the Pure Control 17 Plus. Now, with the 16 Plus, it had the material, they were laceless, but they had the material on the top, which was kind of a bit more soft. Like these have gone all the way wrapped around, and we had players wearing these. We got hold of a pair of these, but the ones that went to retail had the material on the top still. But as soon as we jumped to the checkered black, then everybody could buy these as well. And Adidas never said anything about it, never made a big deal about it, and it's a little bit strange that they weren't quite ready for the launch of the 17 Plus with this version that they went for further on, but they obviously decided to settle on it a little bit later on, and the players preferred it over what they were getting with the 16 Plus. So an enhancement, and they just bring it out. They don't necessarily make a big fuss and a deal about it, which is a little bit of a shame really, because it is a big enhancement and we think you guys should know about it, but then that's why you subscribe to the channel, because we're going to tell you stuff like that. Okay, so that's that launch picture of the Pure Controls 17 Plus, as I was saying, slightly different to these player ones that we've got here. Now, this is what we're going to start talking about today and really get into, is these are the launch Opus. So when the Magista 2 came out, the Magista 2 Opus, they had their upper with this heat map graphic and all those kind of good things going on with it. But as you can see, it's slightly different than what we've got on the Opus. Now the Opus has what we call kind of these pimples. They're kind of the raised bits, but you could see them externally on the boot. And one of the things that we just didn't like about it was they looked ugly. At least they looked ugly to us. Some people might like the design, but we just kind of felt that they looked ugly. Different on the Opus, because on the Opus it's hidden underneath the layer of the Nike skin. So yes, it has the heat map graphic, and I can't say I'm a massive fan of the heat map graphic anyway, but at least it was hiding these foam pods. The technology's still there. Both boots have that same technology. No Flyknit in this Opus, but it is in the Obra. But the foam pods themselves and all about these high touch areas and contact areas, they are there all across the boot, and they were exposed. Now, one of the things we saw was when the Nike TechCraft 2.0 pack came out, these were these leather, beautiful Opus, and they covered up the pods. So because they were leather, they put the leather all over the top of the upper. It hadn't got any little holes for these foam pods to pop out on that you'd seen on the launch Magistas. All the other Magistas though, they did go back to having these little exposed foam pods. So there's little cutouts in the Kangalite upper, which in itself is a little bit strange, having these kind of exposed, popped out bits. But that's what Nike did. They had these exposed little pop outs, and it wasn't the greatest thing that we'd seen on the Opus. Players like Andres Iniesta, he started off, he wore those launch Magistas, then he trained and he wore other colorways of the Magistas. But what we started to notice was that he had one customization, which is he likes to have his sole plate switched, so he doesn't actually have the Magista sole plate on his boots. He has his own customized version. Well, Nike went one step further and they started customizing the upper for him as well. So if you see in this picture, he has a smooth upper on the top of his Opus. It's not got the bobbles like you would see on the earlier releases that he was wearing. There you can see his sole plate as I was talking about. But really interesting. So one of the things that really kicks on these changes mid-generation is player feedback. Neymar, Ross Barkley, players like that were complaining about the Hypervenom, and they pushed through those changes and that feedback to Nike. Same, Iniesta, he switched. He was obviously kind of that headline player of the original Obras, but he didn't really like the collar, so he moved to the Opus, and his feedback is what is shaping what you're seeing with the Opus 2. Here he is again in action with that slightly customized boot. It is in the dark lighting, but it doesn't have those bobbles protruding as you've seen on the retail versions. Now, another reason we think that Nike have changed what they've done on the upper with the Opus is they're starting to try and pair these boots together a lot more. So there's hardly any difference visually between the low collar and the high collar of the Hypervenom Phantoms. They don't even change the name anymore, they just call it the Phantom and the Phantom DF, that's it. So they've paired it together. You can hardly see any tech differences between those two. If you then look at the Mercurial line, very similar again. The upper is different on these, but when you actually look at it on pitch, you can hardly tell the difference. So that's what's Nike doing, they're combining them together here. Now this is the first look at the Opus in the motion blur pack, and as you can see, it looks very similar to its big brother, the Obra. There are some differences, I'll get into them in a minute, but first glance, if you see it on pitch, you think it is pretty much the same boot, and I think that's one of the main reasons, aside from the players' support and the feedback, is Nike just want to make sure that they can tie all these colorways together, and by taking out this kind of hideous pimple design, it means that these two can look a lot similar because they've both got that covered upper. I do think one of the things that Nike perhaps missed out on is changing the upper to perhaps using more Flyknit. Perhaps that's something that you might be seeing players are actually testing in camo versions and we can't quite see. Perhaps that's something that we're going to see in the Opus 3 if indeed that comes out in the future. You could imagine perhaps having a Kanga light or similar material at the front and then Flyknit at the back, or maybe they might go the whole kind of 9 yards and actually use an entire Flyknit upper, so completely mimicking the Obra with the Opus, as you see happens with the Hypervenoms. I think that would be a really great boot if you could have that low collar exactly the same as you see on the Phantom lows. That would be an amazing boot, and I think the Opus would look great with that. I mean, like using Flyknit and combining it with the upper is something perhaps you could see with the Tiempos as well. I was talking about them needing to fix the problems with the Tiempos. Perhaps in the Nike Tiempo Legend 7s you might see them using leather in the forefoot and then maybe Flyknit at the back. That way you can reduce the weight of the boot, bring it down a little bit. I mean, to some extent the Opus is a relatively heavy boot for what it is, and that could be a way that they could strip some weight out, is by using Flyknit in the back portion and then Kangalite or leather or whatever else they're going to use when they're creating the boot in the forefoot. So let's get a look at the Opus itself, and I'll tell you a little bit about what they've done. So as you can see, the pimples have gone and they're now hidden underneath this Kangalite upper. Big improvement, and it means they're going to have a lot more they can play around with the uppers and the designs, and they can combine the things together. Here's the women's version, again exactly the same on the upper. It doesn't have any kind of big blue splodges popping out or anything like that. It's hidden underneath the Kangalite upper. Now, technology-wise and touch and the feedback they would have had from Iniesta is players weren't particularly liking these bobbles that were exposed. It made a difference to them with the touch. They weren't making a touch with the ball with the Kangalite upper. They were making a touch with the foam pods and the little bit of upper that was put onto those, which is different than having this over smooth upper. It's very much a different thing playing with this whole kind of smooth upper across the top, and playing something that had these protruding parts through it. Another thing with the Opus is the original Opus had a much, it seemed to be just a little bit softer, a little bit lighter, a little bit thinner, the upper. So we're feeling that perhaps Nike have just switched and tweaked the upper a little bit to try and bring it back again. Exactly what they did with the Hypervenoms. They've just changed the upper, they've listened to people, and they tried to bring out something that people are going to really like. What did you think about the changes that Nike have made to these Opus 2? Do you prefer the way that they came out in the launch ones, where you could see the raised foam pods and they really stood out? Or are you more of a fan of the fact that they've now covered it up with the upper and it's all tucked in there together, and it's a lot more symmetrical and a lot more matching to the Obras? If you want to know anything more about these boots, make sure you drop a comment below. We'll try and reply to your questions. Thanks for watching. Go enjoy your football.